The first phone rang at 2:17 a.m. in an office that had been empty for hours. It was the desk phone in accounting, 3 rows away from where I was working. When I answered, there was nothing on the line except slow breathing. Then a voice whispered, "Don't pick up the next one." A minute later, the phone at the desk beside it began to ring. Then the next one. Then every phone on the floor started ringing at the same time. Then every phone on the floor started ringing. I used to work overnight IT support for a regional insurance company in downtown Milwaukee. The company occupied 11 floors of an office building near the river. During the day, nearly 800 people worked there. Claims adjusters, accountants, legal teams, customer support, human resources, people whose names I never learned even though I reset their passwords every week. At night, the building felt completely different. By 7, most employees were gone. By 9, the cleaning crews had moved upstairs. By 11, the only people left were usually one security guard in the lobby and me. My job was mostly maintenance, software updates, server checks, replacing broken monitors, installing equipment that would have been too disruptive during business hours. It was boring work, but the company paid extra for overnight shifts, and I liked being left alone. At least, I did at first. The building was modern enough to look impressive from the street, but much of its internal technology was old. The elevators had been renovated. The computers were new. The security system was mostly digital, but the desk phones were ancient. Every workstation had the same gray office phone with a small green screen, 12 plastic buttons, and a red message light in the corner. They were all connected to an internal phone system installed sometime in the late 90s. The company had been planning to replace it for years. They never did. The night everything started, I was working on the 8th floor. The 8th floor belonged to the accounting department. During the day, it was one large open office divided into cubicles, with conference rooms along the windows and private offices near the back. At night, it was a maze of dark partitions and empty chairs. I had been sent there to install a security update on 43 desktop computers. The process was simple but slow. I would start the update on one machine, move to the next, then circle back once each one restarted. Around midnight, the cleaning crew finished the floor and left. One of the cleaners, a woman named Rosa, stopped beside me before she went to the elevator. "You staying up here?" she asked. I told her I probably had another 3 hours. She looked across the dark office. Most of the overhead lights had already switched off. Only the motion-sensitive lights above my row of desks remained on. Rosa said, "Keep the lights on." I laughed and told her I would try. She didn't laugh. Then she pressed the elevator button and left. I remember checking the time after that, 12:08 a.m. For the next 2 hours, nothing happened. I listened to a podcast through one earbud and moved from desk to desk. Every few minutes, the motion lights behind me would shut off, leaving more of the office in darkness. At 2:15, I reached the last computer. It belonged to someone named Daniel Keene. His name was printed on a small plastic plate beside the monitor. His desk was unusually clean. No family photographs, no coffee mug, no papers, only a keyboard, a mouse, and the gray office phone. I started the update and waited. At 2:17, the phone rang. I nearly jumped. It was not a normal electronic ringtone. These phones had an old mechanical sound, sharp and repetitive, loud enough to carry through the whole floor. I looked at the screen. The caller ID displayed 4 numbers. 8011. That was an internal extension. I didn't recognize it. I considered ignoring it, but overnight employees sometimes called it directly when they were working from home. I picked up. "IT support," I said. For several seconds, no one answered. I could hear faint static and something that sounded like office ventilation. Then a man whispered, "Don't pick up the next one." I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the display. 8011. I put it back. "Who is this?" The man breathed into the receiver. Then he said, "You're at Daniel's desk." I looked down at the nameplate. Daniel Keene. I felt the first real movement of fear in my stomach. "How do you know where I am?" The line clicked dead. I stood there holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone. For a moment, the entire floor was silent. Then the phone at the desk beside me rang. I stared at it. The voice had told me not to answer the next one. I didn't. The phone rang 6 times, then stopped. A few seconds later, the phone 2 desks down began ringing, then another. The ringing moved away from me through the cubicles, 1 desk at a time. Each phone rang exactly 6 times before the next one started. It sounded like something traveling across the office. Ring, silence, ring, silence, moving slowly through the dark rows. I stepped into the aisle and watched the small green screens light up one after another. Every phone displayed the same extension, 8011. The ringing reached the far side of the floor, then stopped. I waited. Nothing happened. I told myself someone was testing the internal phone system. Maybe a scheduled maintenance process. Maybe a malfunction caused by the software updates. I called the security desk. A guard named Carl answered. I asked whether anyone else was still in the building. He checked the badge system and said no one had entered after midnight. The cleaning crew had left 8 minutes earlier. According to the system, only he and I were inside. I asked him if extension 8011 belonged to anyone. He typed for a few seconds. Then he said, "That extension doesn't exist." I looked across the office again. The motion lights were turning off behind me, 1 row at a time. Carl asked if I wanted him to come upstairs. I almost said yes. Instead, I told him it was probably a phone glitch. I finished the update, packed my tools, and took the elevator down. As I passed the reception desk on the 8th floor, the receptionist's phone rang. Just once. The doors closed before it rang again. The next night, I asked my supervisor about extension 8011. His name was Greg, and he had worked for the company for almost 15 years. He knew every piece of equipment in the building and treated most problems as personal insults. He searched the phone directory. No extension 08011. He checked old directories. Still nothing. Then he asked which desk had received the call. I said Daniel Keene's. Greg stopped typing. He looked at me. "Why were you at that desk?" I reminded him that he had assigned me to update the 8th floor computers. He shook his head. "No, I mean, why that desk?" I didn't understand. Greg turned his monitor slightly so I could see. Daniel Keene was not listed as a current employee. His account had been deactivated 6 years earlier. The computer on his desk should not have existed. I told Greg exactly what I had seen. The nameplate, the clean desk, the phone. He opened the 8th floor seating chart. The place where Daniel's desk should have been was marked as an empty space between 2 cubicle rows. No workstation, no employee, no phone. Greg thought I had mistaken the location. I knew I hadn't. We went upstairs together. During the day, the 8th floor was crowded and noisy. Phones rang. Printers rang. People talked over cubicle walls. We walked to the back section where I had worked the night before. There was no desk. The cubicle row ended with a filing cabinet. The space where Daniel's workstation had been was empty. I checked the floor, expecting to see cables or marks where the desk had been moved. Nothing. Greg looked annoyed. He asked if I had been sleeping during my shift. I told him no. Then I noticed something under the filing cabinet, a plastic nameplate. I bent down and pulled it out. Daniel Keene. Greg took it from me. His expression changed. He told me to wait there and walked away with the nameplate. He did not return for almost 20 minutes. When he came back, he said the 8th floor updates were finished and I should work from the server room for the rest of the week. I asked who Daniel Keene was. Greg said, someone who doesn't work here anymore. That night, I stayed on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor contained the IT department, 2 server rooms, several storage closets, and a small break area. There were fewer desk phones than on the upper floors, and most of them were close enough that I could see them from my workstation. I spent the first half of the night checking error logs. At 2:16, I stopped working and watched the clock on my monitor. I felt ridiculous. Nothing was going to happen. At 2:17, the phone on Greg's empty desk rang. The caller ID showed 8011. I did not answer. It rang 6 times. Then my phone rang. The screen displayed a name this time, Melissa Grant. Melissa worked in human resources. I knew her because she had helped process my employment paperwork. She was friendly, organized, and definitely not someone who would call at 2 in the morning. I answered, Melissa? A woman was crying quietly on the other end. I sat up straight. Melissa, are you okay? She whispered. I can't find the stairs. I looked toward the dark office around me. Where are you? The lights went out. Her voice sounded distant and distorted, as if she were speaking from a large empty room. I asked if she was inside the building. She said, I keep walking, but I come back to the same desk. Then the line disconnected. I immediately called Melissa's mobile number from my cell phone. She answered after several rings. Her voice was sleepy. I asked where she was. At home, she said. I asked whether she had just called the office. She said no. I told her someone had called from her extension. There was a long silence. Then she asked, what time is it? I told her. 2:19. Melissa stopped sounding tired. She said, don't answer any more calls. I asked why. She hung up. The phones began ringing, not one at a time, all of them. Every desk phone on the 3rd floor started ringing simultaneously. The sound filled the office. Dozens of identical mechanical rings, overlapping until they became one continuous metallic alarm. Every screen displayed a different employee name. Some I recognized, some I didn't. Greg Matthews, Rosa Alvarez, Carl Peterson, Melissa Grant, Daniel Keene, and my own name. The phone directly in front of me displayed, call from Ethan Hall. That was me. I stared at it. The other phones continued ringing. I answered mine. For a few seconds, I heard only the ringing from both sides of the call. Then my own voice said, leave before the lights turn off. I gripped the receiver. Who is this? My voice answered. You answered too many. The overhead lights went out. Not all at once. The lights above the far side of the office switched off first. Then the next row. Then the next. Darkness moved toward me in sections. The phones continued ringing inside each darkened area. I dropped the receiver, grabbed my backpack, and ran toward the elevators. The lights shut off behind me as I moved. When I reached the elevator lobby, I pressed the call button. Nothing happened. Both elevator displays were blank. I pushed the button again. From somewhere inside the stairwell, a phone started ringing. There was no desk phone in the stairwell. I knew that, but I could hear it behind the metal door. Ring, ring, ring. I used my badge to unlock the stairwell and pulled the door open. The emergency lights inside were dim and green. On the landing below me sat a gray office phone. It was not connected to anything. No cable, no wall socket. Just a phone placed in the middle of the concrete step. Its screen glowed. Call from Carl, security. I took out my cell phone and called Carl directly. No answer. The phone on the stair rang 6 times, then stopped. A second later, the phone 1 floor below started ringing. I could see its screen glowing through the railing. Then another phone started ringing 2 floors down. The phones were leading toward the lobby. I should have stayed where I was. Instead, I followed them. Every floor had 1 phone sitting on the landing. Each began ringing just before I reached it and stopped as I passed. 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor. When I opened the lobby door, I found the security desk empty. Carl's chair was pushed back. His radio lay on the floor. The front doors were locked. The lobby lights flickered. Behind the security desk, the main phone was ringing. Its screen displayed, "Call from lobby security." I looked around. No Carl, no movement. I picked up. A man was breathing heavily on the other end. "Carl," he whispered. "I'm still at the desk." I stared at the empty chair in front of me. "Where?" He started crying. "Don't look at the cameras." I looked at them. The security desk had 6 monitors showing different areas of the building. The first monitor showed the front entrance. The second showed the elevators. The third showed the parking garage. The fourth showed the 3rd floor office. The 5th showed the 8th floor. The 6th showed the lobby. On the 6th monitor, Carl was sitting at the security desk. I was standing beside him, holding the phone. In the real lobby, the chair was empty. On the monitor, Carl turned slowly toward me. His face was pale. He raised 1 finger to his lips. Behind us on the monitor, the elevator doors opened. A group of people stepped into the lobby. Men and women dressed in office clothes. Some carried briefcases. Some wore employee badges. None of them appeared in the real lobby. They existed only on the screen. They walked silently toward the security desk and formed a line behind us. At the front stood a man wearing a white shirt and a dark tie. His badge read, "Daniel Keene." He looked directly into the camera. Then he reached across the desk and pressed one of the phone buttons. The phone in my hand went silent. Every phone in the building began ringing. I could hear them through the lobby ceiling. Hundreds of phones. 11 floors of empty offices, all ringing at once. The sound came through the vents, the elevators, the stairwell doors. The lights above the lobby began shutting off, 1 row at a time. I ran to the front entrance and pulled on the doors. They would not open. My badge did nothing. The emergency release did nothing. On the monitor, the line of office workers moved closer. Daniel stood directly behind the camera version of me. He leaned toward my ear. In the real lobby, I felt cold breath against my neck. A voice whispered, "You're the last one." I turned around. No one was there. The final row of lobby lights shut off. The entire building went dark. For a few seconds, I heard nothing but phones ringing in the floors above me. And then the front doors unlocked. I pushed through them and ran into the street. I did not stop until I reached an all-night diner 3 blocks away. From outside, the office building looked normal. Most windows were dark, but on every floor, one office was lit. 3rd floor, 4th, 5th, all the way to the 11th. In each lit window, someone stood looking down at me. At exactly 2:30, every light switched off. The next morning, Carl was found unconscious in the parking garage. He remembered leaving the security desk around 2:10 to investigate an alarm near the elevators. He said the garage lights went out, and when they came back, he was standing beside his own car with no memory of going downstairs. He did not remember calling me. He did not remember sitting at the desk. He had no explanation for the security footage. Most of the footage from that night was corrupted. The files between 2:17 and 2:30 showed only black screens and broken audio. But one short clip survived. It came from the 8th floor camera. At 2:17, an office appeared in the empty space beside the filing cabinet. A desk, a computer, a phone. Daniel Keene sat in the chair. For 13 minutes, he watched the camera. At 2:30, he picked up the phone and said something. The camera had no microphone, so there was no audio. But Greg watched the clip with me. Daniel's lips were clear enough to read. He said, "Now he knows where to sit." After that, Greg finally told me what had happened. 6 years earlier, Daniel Keene had worked in the accounting department. He had been responsible for payroll corrections, employee terminations, and access records. One night, he stayed late during a major company restructuring. At 2:17 a.m., Daniel called security and said the phones on the 8th floor were ringing by themselves. The guard assumed it was a technical problem. Daniel called again and said the lights were shutting off. Then he called a 3rd time. He said someone was walking through the cubicles, answering each phone. Security went upstairs. Daniel was gone. His coat was still on his chair. His computer was logged in. His car remained in the garage. The building was searched. Police investigated. Daniel was never found. The company removed his workstation and disconnected his phone extension. Greg told me that several overnight employees had reported calls since then, usually 1 or 2 calls. Sometimes a phone would ring on an empty desk. Sometimes a caller would use the name of an employee who was home. But no one had ever seen every phone ring. I asked why the company continued using the system. Greg gave me the same answer companies always give. Replacing it would be expensive. I quit that week. I returned my badge, signed my exit paperwork, and found a daytime job with a smaller company. For several months, nothing happened. Then Melissa Grant disappeared. She had been working late to finish paperwork before a department review. Her badge records showed her leaving the building at 7:14 p.m. Her car was found in the garage the next morning. Her phone and purse were still at her desk. Security footage showed her walking toward the elevators shortly after 7, but another camera showed her returning to her office at 2:17 a.m. She walked through the dark cubicles, sat at an empty desk, and answered a ringing phone. She was never seen leaving again. The company closed the building for 2 days. Then it reopened. I tried not to think about it. A year passed. I moved to another state. I changed my phone number. I stopped using office phones entirely. Then, one Monday morning, I arrived at my new job and found a gray desk phone waiting beside my computer. Same model, same green screen, same red message light. I asked the office manager where it came from. She said the company had bought a large batch of used equipment from an insurance office in Milwaukee. I unplugged the phone immediately. There was no reason it should have worked. At 2:17 that afternoon, it rang. The screen displayed 8011. Everyone around me looked over. I did not answer. It rang 6 times and stopped. Then the phone on the desk beside mine began ringing. Then the next one. The calls moved through the office one desk at a time. When they reached the final desk, every light in the building flickered. My computer screen went black. For a second, I could see my reflection in it. Someone was standing behind me. A man in a white shirt and dark tie. I turned around. No one was there. When I looked back at the computer, the screen had turned on again. An email was open. There was no sender. The subject line read, "New seating assignment." The body contained only one sentence. "Daniel has moved to another floor." Attached was a seating chart for my new office. My name was marked at the desk nearest the back wall. Beside it was another desk that did not exist. The name printed on that desk was Melissa Grant. The phone in front of me rang again. This time the screen displayed my own name. I let it ring. After 6 rings, it stopped. A voicemail notification appeared. I never listened to it, but sometimes when the office is quiet, the phone plays it by itself. It always begins with the sound of hundreds of phones ringing inside a large, empty building. Then I hear Melissa crying. Daniel tells her to be quiet. And finally, my own voice whispers, "Don't pick up the next one."